family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we have a great show for you. The stock market is up today, and if Trump is able to jumpstart the economy like he says, it will be a good time to invest, or at least to learn about investing. And so we're going to talk in just a minute to Art Alley of the Timothy Plan about how a Christian can invest responsibly. After that, we're going to turn to Richard Lim. He's an occasional co-host for Point of View's Millennial Roundtable and host of This American President podcast. And we're going to talk to him a little bit about the inauguration yesterday. It was an interesting and in many ways unique inauguration. And then our last hour, we're going to turn to Jordan Campbell. He's been on the program with me before. He's a founding partner in the law firm Campbell, Miller, and Payne about his lawsuits representing clients who were minors when they went through what's called gender-affirming transition care. So you'll want to be stick around for that. So we're going to start with Art. Art Alley is founder and president of the Timothy Plan, the nation's leading biblically based pro-life, pro-family mutual group fund. And we want to see about investing. Art, thank you for joining us.
Oh, Merrill, it is my honor, sir. Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, it may be a good time to invest these days. Now, let's just start out by talking just a little bit about what an investment company does, just so people get a general idea, and then what's different about the Timothy Plan.
Sure. We're just like all the others in many ways, and we are unique, and I'll get into that. But basically, most listeners probably are familiar with mutual funds. They are professionally managed funds where thousands of investors combine their money. A professional money manager manages it according to the purpose of the fund. And, it is one of the most regulated ways to invest in the country, but it allows people of any size investment to know that they can, whether you have $1,000 or $50 million, you can invest in a mutual fund and know it's professionally managed, it's well diversified. But what makes us unique is, and this happened over 30 years ago, Merrill, when I became aware, because I've been in this industry for 50 years now, became increasingly aware of what corporate America was doing beneath the radar. And here I am, pro-life, leading pro-life events here in Central Florida, which is our headquarters, battling pornography, and then becoming aware that there are corporations that are involved in funding that stuff. And I had to draw a line in the sand, man, and say, you know what? There's nobody out there addressing these issues. There are some very liberal screening funds out there, but nobody was dealing with abortion, pornography, LGBTQ, and all that stuff that's going on. And corporate America, in a lot of cases, are deeply involved in that. So when an investor invests their money in any mutual fund, they own a portfolio that is professionally managed of individual companies that the management firm continues to watch for them, but they could end up inadvertently owning shares of companies through their funds that are operating absolutely opposite to their biblical moral values. So Timothy Plan was launched My friends on Wall Street said, "Allie, you are nuts. You cannot do this." I said, "What do you mean I'm nuts?" And of course, my wife continued to say that. That's a different story, though. What do you mean I'm nuts? They said, "You cannot create an investment program that screens out the largest, most profitable companies in the industry and expect to get good investment returns." Well, Merrill, my response has not changed over these 31 years. I had to tell them, you know what? If you are a serious Bible-believing Christian, obedience trumps performance every time. That's how we started. That's how we still here. But we have proven over 30 years, you don't have to sacrifice performance to follow your biblical principles and your moral values. So we're here to let people know that, you know what, you don't have to own companies that are trying to, for lack of a better term, pursue an unholy agenda or destroy us, because we do the heavy lifting. We screen them out. Long answer to a short question, but that is a run through of how mutual funds work and how Timothy Plan works.
Now, people may have heard of exchange-traded funds, ETFs, and then there's mutual funds. What's the difference? And as I understand it, you are a mutual fund and not an ETF.
Well, it's not and. We are a family of mutual funds. We have 12 what people understand as mutual funds, but we also have 7 exchange-traded funds.
Oh, okay.
All of which are biblically screened by us, not managed by us. We have best managers in the country managing our various funds. But the basic difference right now is a mutual fund is a actively managed portfolio in all kinds of different asset classes. And you invest in the fund at whatever the net asset value is at the close of business that day. And that's simply the total value of all the stocks in the fund divided by the number of shareholders. An exchange-traded fund, in most cases, and they're changing a little bit, is basically an index fund that has a appropriate index that you follow. It's not actively managed. It just owns the index. And we have created our biblically screened indexes on 7 of our exchange-traded funds, and they're traded on the New York Stock Exchange just like any other stock is. So because it's not actively managed, the expenses are a little less because you're not paying a management firm to manage it for you. But it's also, not actively managed, so it's an index fund. We have 7 of those. We have 12 regular mutual funds.
We only have about a minute left in this segment, but give me an idea.
Okay.
What are the differences in these? If I want to invest in technology, do you have a technology fund versus, say, just an S&P 500 fund versus something that invests in oil and gas?
Yeah, good question, Merrill. But no, we do not do. We are very risk adverse. We're very conservative. We don't do sector funds. All of our funds, and we cover the waterfront on asset classes, so you can diversify. But we do not have specific funds that are in a specific industry like that. Ours are broad-based. They're well managed, and people are very happy. But the big thing is, if you are a Bible-believing Christian, why would you want to own shares of a company trying to destroy you? And that's the difference.
We'll be back with my guest, Art Alley, in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about apples and inflation. There's another way to think about inflation that has been part of our economy for the past 100 years. The supply of U.S. dollars has been expanding on average about 7% each year for the last century. That means the value of dollars is cut in half about every 10 years. Just use the rule of 72. Divide 7% into 72. That means the half-life of the U.S. dollar has been about 10 years. We may not notice the decreasing value of dollars until we get even higher inflation. But think of what a 10-year half-life for the dollar means to you. For me, it means that the money I put into a Wells Fargo savings account when I was in grade school has been cut in half 6 times. The U.S. dollar is still the reserve currency of the world, and yet this is what happens with the best fiat currency in the world. If you hold your savings in cash, you are losing value every year. If you hold some of your savings in assets, the value of the asset usually goes up because it takes more dollars to purchase it, but for it to appreciate, your asset has to be both scarce and desirable. Now imagine if you lived in Venezuela or Argentina or Lebanon or Turkey. If your country increases the currency each year by 18%, your currency's half-life is 4 years. If your country increases the currency by 30%, it has a 2.5-year half-life. That is why citizens in these countries can never get ahead. When I hear people tell me that they financially are just treading water, I'm tempted to tell them they're really sinking. Printing more U.S. dollars makes everyone poorer unless they have assets appreciating faster than the money printer. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back on Point of View. My guest for the next segment, Art Alley. He is the founder and president of Timothy Plan. And I want to encourage our listeners to go to the Timothy Plan, timothyplan.com. We also have a link to that on our website at pointofview.net, because you'll find a lot of information about what they do there and what Art's focusing on. And you know, Art, there are companies out there that come up and say, we want to be responsible, and so we aren't going to invest in gun manufacturers or oil and gas companies or anything that has to do with Israel, things of that nature. But you have a list of things, of principles that you try to guide you on what your investment options. Walk through some of those principles.
Well, they're all kind of found in a single book called the Bible. And you know, the Lord is clear on what we should be doing and what we shouldn't. And, you know, when I do workshops and things, I'll always ask the audience, whose money is it? And it's always a Christian audience. I don't talk to the other folks much. And they will always respond, well, it's God's money. And then I'll tongue-in-cheek say, well, you're all lying about it. Because if you really believed it was his money, you might be doing things a little differently than the way you do it. But the big problem, Merrill, is most people who invest really don't know. They go to their Christian financial consultant, tells them where to invest, and their eyes glaze over if you want to talk about specifics. And I hope we didn't confuse anybody in the first segment. But they don't know. So we have tools at the Timothy Plan where we can help them know. If anybody wants to call us with the name of the funds they're investing in, we can give them a complimentary report that will tell them how much of the money God's entrusted to them has been invested in companies that are involved in abortion or are involved in pornography or promoting LGBTQ or anti-family entertainment or any of the slew of other things, we will not own, because God's word says, don't be involved in those things. Come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. That is the motivation of Timothy. And, we don't point fingers. We don't condemn anything. We just research. We know what these companies are doing. And if they're violating biblical principles, we will not allow our money management firms to invest in them.
So let's say, Art, that I've got a little bit of money. I'm a Christian. I've set a little bit of money aside, and I want to invest. I feel like I need to start doing that responsibly. But I don't know the difference between an IRA or just putting money back in some kind of account or something. Can I call you and find out, get some information about that, and walk us through that process?
Sure. We make it easy, Merrill. Most of our shareholders have financial advisors, and we will even educate their advisor on biblical principles of investing. But if they don't have one, they can call us, and you know what? You will have a human being answer the phone, not a computer. They will connect you with another human being that can really walk you through and explain things to you. And it's a simple phone number. It's 800-TIM-PLAN. Or they can go to our the website and find out on their own. And it's pretty easy to navigate. But most people don't have a clue. And then what you just said about, geez, is it an IRA? Is it that all depends on how you title the account. And we have every kind of account available. And we can help them decide, do you want to be in a Roth IRA or a traditional, or just a regular account or a joint account or a gift to minor or trust the minors account for your kids' education. It's all the same investment. It's just how you title the account. And we make that very easy for people. But we also make it easy for people to know, where is this money invested that you're currently invested? We can tell you, and then it's up to you what to do about it.
Occasionally I read stories of people who've been famous money managers, have investment funds and so forth, and they did very well for several years, and then for a few years they just haven't done well at all, and their investors have lost a lot of money. How do your investments stack up against, say, just the general market?
Well, in the markets, they go up and they go down, and that's short-term movement. But over time, if it's a well-managed account and you own companies that are run well, profitable, low debt, good products, you're going to do okay. You just live through the ups and downs of the fear and greed that drive the market on a short-term basis. But if you got a good manager that's watching every day the companies that they own, and if they see one that's troubled, they will sell it and replace it with something else. But it is going to fluctuate. It's going to fluctuate daily. And if you are going to fixate on the daily fluctuations, my advice is do not invest, because you're going to end up losing money. But if you stay course and it's well managed, our funds are very competitive. Things are up sometime, they're down sometime. But you know what, Merrill? Over time, markets, the value of stocks go up a lot more than they go down. So if you live through those times, you generally, at least historically, have done very well. But if you're going to panic when things are going down, and that's when you're going to sell, and then it turns around, starts going up, and you get a little greedy, and then you get in then. Do not let emotions dictate the way you invest money.
Art, there's a lot
and can't just leave there. Just stay through. If it's well managed, you're going to do okay.
There is a lot of discussion these days about crypto, digital currencies, and things of that nature. And other people are wanting to put money in gold or silver. What's your thoughts on all those?
Well, the gold and silver has always been a store of value. In fact, one of our funds is called the Defensive Strategies Fund that actually owns gold bullion, just in case. It's there for people that are concerned about where things are going.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's more in America again, and like you said in the beginning, things are really looking good right now. With yesterday was a banner day for America with this administration that is going to eliminate a lot of the regulations that's strangling corporate America, and you know, things are really going to at least for a while be on a positive track. But you know, the advice I can give people is only invest what you can just leave there. Don't invest every penny you have. You got to have first get out of debt. That's the best investment you can make. Then have a reserve built up for when stuff goes wrong, and then you invest the excess. And if it's well managed, you are going to do okay. But if I don't understand it, I'll guarantee you Timothy's not going to get involved in it. And all this crypto stuff, although our president seems to like it, I don't understand it. I think it's way too risky. You know, you can be a millionaire one day and a pauper the next, the way that operates. We don't do that. We have good, solid companies and good, solid assets managed by top-tier money management firms, all subject to the screening research that we do in-house at Timothy right here in Orlando, Florida. And one question people usually ask me is, you know, how many companies do you screen out? You know, and Merrill, there's about 8,000 domestic companies, United States companies.
Really?
Lot enough to invest in. Take a guess how many of those we will not invest in because they're pursuing an unholy agenda.
100.
Of the 8,000?
Yeah, I'm just guessing. I don't know.
Yeah, sure are. Usually people will say 90% you can, and well, that's not true. We screen out right about 10% of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So our managers are able to effectively manage it and just not own those companies. They'll replace it with a different company. We make it possible for people to follow their biblical principles and their moral values.
Well,
because 31 years ago, you don't have to own those companies.
Art, I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to encourage our listeners to go to timothyplan.com, or they can go to pointofview.net and find out about that and get more information there. Art, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you guys for what you're doing. How you doing?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The Bible tells us not to worry. And yet, there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes, even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And now we turn to the inauguration. We have on the line with us Richard Lim. He is the host of the podcast, This American President. He's also a frequent co-host with Point of View's Millennial Roundtable, so you'll hear him there frequently. And he's also an expert in the presidency. He writes for the Heritage Foundation's The Daily Signal. He served at the White House and at George Washington's Mount Vernon estate. He got an undergraduate degree from the University of California, San Diego, and a master's degree from Syracuse University. Richard, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You know, it was an interesting inauguration. They held it inside. That was one of the more unique parts about that. You know, back in 2005, I was at George W. Bush's second inauguration, and they'd had a big storm right before that, snowstorm, and so we had to go through security. We stood out on the White House lawn, freezing in snow. I think it was probably 25 degrees or so, and there were thousands of us standing out there. So I know they've done it in very cold weather and snow, because I was standing there, had to go out and actually buy a cap and gloves to be able to attend that because it was so bad. But they decided to hold it inside, and it was a very interesting inauguration. Give us some of your thoughts on it.
Absolutely. You know, there is always something fascinating and majestic about the inauguration. There's something beautiful about it. You have a citizen selected by his fellow citizens, swearing before God and the world to uphold the backbone of the American political system, the Constitution, and all that it stands for. And unfortunately, not every president has honored that promise, but it is a beautiful thing to behold. With that said, Trump was bold. He was who he is. He's not going to change for anybody. Mm-hmm. He called out the establishment, who just happened to be sitting right behind him, yes. Basically saying that they have betrayed the American people, and there they were right behind him. And it was a classic Trump moment, and I think that it gave a lot of people great satisfaction for an establishment that I think so many people believe deserves it. And I have to say, just to plug my favorite president, George Washington, mm-hmm. my favorite painting in American history, Washington resigning his commission. The portrait is in the rotunda of the Capitol, so that made a beautiful backdrop, as did the painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
You know, of all the great legacies George Washington left us, I think the greatest was his willingness to voluntarily step down after 2 terms and let the transfer of power go on peacefully, because he could have been king if he wanted to, I suspect. And that set the pattern for presidents up till Franklin Delano Roosevelt. No one would dare go past 2 terms just because George Washington didn't.
Absolutely. And, you know, the whole point of that decision, and he did it twice, after the revolution and then after 2 terms as president. And he did it because in a republic, the people decide who the leaders will be. It's about the people. And I think right now you have a president that is doing what he can to restore rule by the people and not by a small elite to make decisions for all of us.
You know, it's interesting because you mentioned the others that were sitting behind him there, and you just had to, I mean, it has to be difficult for Kamala Harris, Joe Biden. I'm not sure Joe Biden really grasped everything, but then, of course, Barack Obama was there, Bill Clinton was there, Hillary Clinton was there. They're there for this peaceful transfer of power, even though, you know, some of them are just grinding their teeth at the fact that it's going over to a Republican.
Well, not only that, but few presidents have been such a thorough repudiation of so many people that came before them. You know, you had the globalism and the corruption of the Clintons. You have the foreign interventions under Bush and the establishment politics of Bush. You have Barack Obama and the woke establishment. You have Joe Biden and wokeism at its worst levels. And all of that, Donald Trump is a repudiation of. So he has, in a sense, almost erased their legacies in many ways. He's removed their accomplishments and repudiated them. He represents the American people's rejection of those policies. So I would say that's even more so.
But, it's interesting, Richard, because these inaugurations are becoming, I would say, increasingly politicized over time. And you may have more knowledge on this than I do. But in Trump's first inauguration, there were several members of Congress who decided they were not going to go to it just as sort of a way of protest. There were some who didn't go. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't go. But there were some who didn't go this time because they wanted to protest the change.
Absolutely. And I think what you're seeing now, there have been several presidents that have not attended their successors' inaugurations, and some of them were for, reasons of differences, policy differences, or just kind of anger at how the campaign went. Both Adamses, John and John Quincy, didn't attend their successors' inaugurations. There were a number that couldn't attend for unique circumstances. Woodrow Wilson was incapacitated. Richard Nixon had resigned, and there wasn't really an inauguration. There was a swearing in of Gerald Ford. But, you're seeing this more and more, and it's because we see a progressive left that politicizes everything, and when you see someone stand against it, they demonize them. They demonize Trump as Hitler, and not just Hitler, because they always do that. Nixon was Hitler, Reagan was Hitler, Bush was Hitler, but Trump was really, 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 really Hitler. And so
we really mean it this time.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem with that is that, certain people won't attend, like AOC and Michelle Obama, but certain people will attend, like Bill Clinton and Hillary and Obama. And I think there are a number of people on the left that are saying, wait a minute, I thought this guy was Hitler. Why are you hanging out with him? Why are you smiling? Why are you shaking his hand? Why are you clapping? And they really back themselves in a corner as a result.
This politicization is affecting the presidency, and in my mind, the role of the president is changing in some ways, evolving over time. It seems like there's less willingness of Congress to compromise on various types of legislation, and that led to Barack Obama saying, I have a pen and a phone, and the Congress won't do what I want them to do, so I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. And it's changing the nature of this as presidents have to take on, I'd say more. Attempt to try to take on more power because there's so many things Congress can't do. And just yesterday, the President Trump signing so many executive orders as a way to kind of get things rolling.
Absolutely. The thing is that, and I think it's important to clarify why there is so much polarization, why there's a less willingness to compromise. And the reason is because it's not because both sides are equally bad, et cetera. It's because you have the progressive left that is trying to push the country as far left as possible. And when you're a side that believes that you have the keys to the kingdom, you're going to usher in utopia, of course you're not going to be willing to compromise, because anyone that questions you is standing away of heaven, even though it actually leads to hell. And Woodrow Wilson did it. He was a my way or the highway kind of guy. FDR got a blank slate from Congress, just did whatever he wanted. Lyndon Johnson exploited the Kennedy assassination to push through the Great Society. And yeah, Barack Obama. And one of the things I always like to point out is that Barack Obama, gave us Obamacare, and he shoved that down our throats. Mm-hmm. Without any Republican support, and they blamed the Republicans for that. Well, guess what? The only thing bipartisan about Obamacare was the opposition to it, because there were Democrats that opposed it. But again, when you have a one side that's trying to push and push, of course you're going to have a less willingness to compromise, and you force the other side to try to stop you at all costs. And so that's the root cause of all of this hyper partisanship.
You, of course, hit that exactly right. When during the debates on Obamacare, some of the Republicans said, we're trying to work with you, and you're not listening to us. And Barack Obama said, I'm paraphrasing, but I won the election, which means
exactly.
I get to do what I want to do. And as you point out...
And ignoring that the American people did vote for him for president, but they also voted for the Tea Party Congress to check him because they didn't like the policies.
That's absolutely right, and they did have to struggle to get some Democrats finally through. They were able to get it done. Stay with us. We're talking with Richard Lim about the inauguration and the presidency. So we'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back with our final segment with Richard Lim, who is an occasional co-host with Point of View's Millennial Roundtable and the podcast head of the podcast, This American President. We're talking about the presidency and the inauguration. And you know, Richard, you were talking a little bit about how far the left, Democrats on the left, the progressives, have tried to push the party. And you have this frequent lament about the absence of bipartisanship. And I have my own take on this is, and I've been doing this for over 30 years in the public policy realm. But back when I first started, you had Democrats, you had liberal Democrats, but you had some moderate Democrats and some that were kind of conservative-ish. And then on the Republican side, you had conservative Republicans, you had some moderate Republicans, and some that tended to be on the liberal side. And so because it was ideologically diverse among the two parties, I would argue you could make you could get bipartisan legislation through, because if it was conservative, some of the conservative legislation would appeal to some of the conservative Democrats. And if it was liberals, that would appeal to some of the liberal Republicans. But that's largely changed now. You don't really you have some Democrats who are a little on the moderate side, some Republicans who are a little on the moderate side, but by and large, they've sort of pushed to the outside extremes on those. And so getting bipartisan legislation is just increasingly difficult, it looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make. It's interesting because people of my generation and younger are just used to the entire political spectrum being basically all Republicans from center left or center right to the right, and all Republicans from center left to the left. Did I get that right? Republicans center right to the right, and Democrats center left to the left. And yet that's a relatively new phenomenon. That about 100 years ago and before that, you had kind of both parties that were parallel to each other, and you might have a progressive Democrat had more in common with a progressive Republican than he did with a conservative Democrat in his own party. And you saw attempts by Teddy Roosevelt and FDR to basically consolidate all the progressives in both parties into one party and kind of take over and be a new party. But you've seen both parties kind of take their place on a continuum. And as a result of that, you have both parties kind of digging their heels against each other, and unifying against the other side. And that's just the reality of how it is. But I do think it owes to the fact that the progressive left, the left took over the Democratic Party and has forced the Republicans farther and farther to the right as a response, and that's what we're seeing.
We saw Barack Obama, Mr. Pen in the phone. He couldn't get things through Congress, so he started trying to do increasingly, I would argue, just try to move legislation just through by executive order, which is not really legislation, but it's executive order. We saw Donald Trump increase that a little bit. Saw Joe Biden trying to do everything he could without bypassing Congress because he couldn't get it through. And now you have yesterday President Trump signing, they were talking about nearly 200 executive orders covering a whole range of things as a way to sort of set the pattern for the presidency. Is the presidency getting stronger or weaker when it comes to Congress, do you think?
Well, it's gotten so much stronger over the past 2 centuries. I mean, this is something that happened. And again, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but once you had the progressives in power, everything became centralized in the presidency. And this is so different than how our founders created the presidency itself. The president, it's interesting because when George Washington became president, he had been in all the debates creating the Constitution. He knew that thing inside out. And he said, and I'm quoting, that Congress is the first wheel of the government. And it's only after Congress moves that all the rest of the wheels of government move as well. So Congress is the initiator. And the reason why that's the case is because, and this is the way it was, especially when it came to legislation, because essentially you want Congress because they're the closest to the people. They're the branch closest to the people. You want them making decisions because that affects every American, and you want them, the American people, their representatives, having to debate it out and balance different interests. And only once they pass a law, would the president act. And the president's job was merely to execute the law. The president gets to sign laws and veto laws, but that was mainly a constitutional check, not a preferential check, not a policy check. And so that was the way it was supposed to work. And unfortunately, the presidency is used as a Trojan horse to force through an agenda, and now the side that does support the Constitution, the Republicans, are forced to respond in kind by having the president undo a lot of these things. And what you're seeing is President Trump through executive orders undoing the damage that progressives have done. But, progressives have used executive orders to put thousands of Japanese people in prison during the Japanese internment. Obama used it to order amnesty for 5 million illegal immigrants. Republicans have used it as well. Nixon used it to freeze wages and prices. And this is way beyond what it's usurpation. It's ignoring the will of the people whenever they do this.
Well, to your point about the branches of government, I mean, it sometimes is said we had 3 equal branches of government, but Congress was the first among equals, which sort of meant that they, as you say, had to start things. They have to initiate laws. They have to fund the government. Congress was the closest to the people because they were being reelected every 2 years or elected every 2 years. So it does seem that an awful lot of power, I would argue, even from Congress's standpoint, has ceded some of that power to the administration by passing sweeping legislation that you can't deal with every aspect of it. So you just simply give secretaries and other people in the administration the power to make a lot of these decisions, and that just sort of cedes a lot of power to the administration.
Many of which is blatantly unconstitutional. I mean, Congress has the power of the purse. Congress has purview over so many things because these are policies that affect the average American, and they want as many people involved in this as possible. They want the deliberation of Congress. And when Congress does that and it gives up its inherent powers, it essentially is acting against the Constitution. You think about the fact that Congress has the responsibility to declare war, because again, if America's going to go to war, you want the American people having a say in that decision. Well, what was the last war we actually declared? It was World War II. Vietnam, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq. All of these interventions happened because the president just said so. And to me, that's a problem. And you can get into the nuances of it, and maybe it was necessary at the time, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is that Congress has just completely given up that authority to one person, which is very dangerous.
We've got about a minute left. Take 30 seconds to tell us what you hope to see from the Trump administration.
Well, I hope that they don't have establishment figures like they did in the first time. Trump got 5 countries to make agreements with Israel, recognizing Israel. That was incredible. Yeah, and if he can swing Saudi Arabia, that would be incredible, and just continue that. It's the hardest region in the world to get those agreements, and he did it, and I hope he keeps doing it.
Thank you, Richard, for joining us. We have more information about Richard on our website, pointofview.net, and you, of course, can hear him occasionally as a co-host of Point of View's Millennial Roundtable. Thank you for joining us, Richard.
Thank you.
When we come back, we turn to Jordan Campbell to talk about the transgender care and the lawsuits that he has been working on. So stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
In 19th century London, 2 towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I really appreciate your program. I don't get to listen to it every day because I have to work, but it's a really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
I just appreciate all you guys do. I mean, I learned so much, and it's amazing what you teach that I say to other people, and they look at me like, where did you hear that? So I appreciate you guys. So thank you for all you do.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we've got a great last hour for you here. Joining me in studio, Jordan Campbell. He is the founding partner at Campbell, Miller & Payne. It is the first and only law firm in the country exclusively dedicated to representing detransitioners and others harmed by radical gender ideology. We've had Jordan here before, and Jordan, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
We're here for an update of what's happening, but start us out by telling us, because you were a lawyer with a large law firm. You decided to step down and start this new firm. Tell us about that background.
Yeah, so I started out in big law, as we will say in law school, in the legal world, working downtown in the big buildings, and was there for 7 years and really enjoyed doing the work I did there, but decided to go to a smaller, more boutique firm of about 20 lawyers here in town that I absolutely loved. Brown Fox, great, amazing team of attorneys, got to be doing some really great work. And I figured that's where I was going to retire, in 40 years or whatever. But then God had different plans, as He often does. Just kind of laughs when you think you've got it all figured out. So,
just when you think you've got it all figured out,
that's exactly right. Just like when He surprises you with the seventh child, when you think you're done at 6, right? I had been there for about a couple years, and I did not know much about the trans issue, if you will, to put it in simple terms. Knew very little beyond maybe like the NBA All-Star game being moved from North Carolina because of a bathroom bill, right? That's about as much as I knew. And then I was listening to a podcast, trying to walk the dog one night, just looking for something to listen to. And this subject sort of came up on the podcast. And I couldn't tell you why, other than obviously Providence, but it sent me down just an intellectual rabbit hole. And I spent the better part of a few months kind of learning everything I could on the subject. And the more I learned, the more aghast I became, and had a moment in October of 22 where I literally was sitting on my bed. I threw my hands up and I said, man, somebody needs to do something to stop essentially what they're doing, these kids and vulnerable young adults. And felt like God kind of hit me in the head and said, well, that's why I just showed you all this stuff. So you go do something. And so that was sort of where the idea of the firm came, was, okay, I feel like I'm being called to this. Let's use the tools, the trainings, the giftings that I've been given as a litigator to go do something. And so we set about to do that.
So you have a small firm now. How many attorneys do you have?
There's 4 of us.
4 of you. And you're working on various types of cases?
Yes. Most all of them are representing plaintiffs pursuing what are essentially medical malpractice claims against the doctors that, quote unquote, transitioned them.
The last time we talked, President Biden was still in charge. Kamala Harris was there. The whole country, from sort of the leading of the executive, the administration, was trying to promote the change to transgenderism, the support for it, and so forth. We've had something of a tidal shift here, starting really yesterday. President Trump signing an executive order. I guess you've looked at that a little bit. What do you think about this executive order?
So the executive order is fantastic. Obviously, it could not be a more monumental seismic shift from the previous administration, as you well know. And I think what it beyond the sort of set action items that it lists out, I think the most significant thing to me is that it is just indicative of what I think is truly a similar seismic shift culturally where we are on the subject from where we were even 4 years ago, where it wasn't almost socially acceptable to speak out against this issue. There are very few, even conservative, commentators speaking out on it, and now, just over the past few years, I think we are up to 26 states that have some sort of legislation curbing or banning the practice of pediatric, quote unquote, gender medicine. And it just feels like the momentum is not just on our side, but it's continually growing. And so I think that executive order is illustrative of that. And now it is, I'd say, putting kind of lighter fluid on the good side, on the fire, in terms of, I think you're going to see a lot more progress being made very quickly over the next couple of years.
And the Supreme Court has decided to hear one or two cases, I guess, along these lines?
Yes. So the Supreme Court heard just a couple months ago the Scrimeti case, and that was the appeal where the United States government appealed Tennessee's ban on pediatric gender medicalization, so the transing of kids. So the U.S. government came in as an intervener in that case, and they basically challenged that law. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court heard that a couple months ago now. And now they've taken another case, and this is a parental rights case, where a group of parents were frustrated that the school was putting this sort of junk into their curriculum, and objected to it. And the school said, you can't opt out. And so that's what this case is about, is sort of the parental rights to oversee my child's education, vis-a-vis indoctrinating my kids with this dangerous ideology.
So the Supreme Court has not decided the Scrimeti case, I guess it is.
That's right.
And it's going to hear the other case. I think they've announced they're going to hear that. So it's probably going to be May or June before we hear something from this on the Supreme Court, you think?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be June or July. They tend to issue the more controversial or perhaps politically charged is probably a better way to phrase it, opinions towards the end. So I think we'll probably see those holdings come out towards the end. My guess is June, July, if I'm not mistaken. Always
hard to know how the Supreme Court's going to do this, but do you have a sense based upon their questions and just the discussion that was going on during these cases?
Yes. So in Scrimeti, the Tennessee's ban, all indications are at least 5 of the justices will vote to uphold it, if not 6, which is to say to uphold Tennessee's law and rule that it is in fact constitutional and states can regulate this barbaric practice. So, keep your fingers crossed. You can never count your chickens before they hatch. But I do get the sense, based on the oral argument, based on just how we understand the judges to be on these types of issues, I think you'll see probably all 6 of the conservative justices vote to uphold the law.
And I think you said we've got about 25 states, about half the states have passed something along that line?
That's right.
And that's including Texas, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll be looking to see what happens there. Our guest for this hour, Jordan Campbell. He is a founding partner of a law firm that specializes in representing detransitioners. These are generally minors who went through what we call gender-affirming care, transition care. They may have become adults now, and they're looking back on this and feeling like there's just it has created so many problems for them. In many cases, they don't feel like they got good advice, medical advice from the medical community. So stay with us. We'll be back with Jordan Campbell in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about apples and inflation. There's another way to think about inflation that has been part of our economy for the past 100 years. The supply of U.S. dollars has been expanding on average about 7% each year for the last century. That means the value of dollars is cut in half about every 10 years. Just use the rule of 72. Divide 7% into 72. That means the half-life of the U.S. dollar has been about 10 years. We may not notice the decreasing value of dollars until we get even higher inflation. But think of what a 10-year half-life for the dollar means to you. For me, it means that the money I put into a Wells Fargo savings account when I was in grade school has been cut in half 6 times. The U.S. dollar is still the reserve currency of the world, and yet this is what happens with the best fiat currency in the world. If you hold your savings in cash, you are losing value every year. If you hold some of your savings in assets, the value of the asset usually goes up because it takes more dollars to purchase it, but for it to appreciate, your asset has to be both scarce and desirable. Now imagine if you lived in Venezuela or Argentina or Lebanon or Turkey. If your country increases the currency each year by 18%, your currency's half-life is 4 years. If your country increases the currency by 30%, it has a 2.5-year half-life. That is why citizens in these countries can never get ahead. When I hear people tell me that they financially are just treading water, I'm tempted to tell them they're really sinking. Printing more U.S. dollars makes everyone poorer unless they have assets appreciating faster than the money printer. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back on Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and joining me in studio is Jordan Campbell. He is the founding partner at Campbell Miller Payne. That is the first and only law firm in the country exclusively dedicated to representing detransitioners and others harmed by the radical gender ideology and the surgery and the medical care. And I want to put the numbers out there: 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. That's our numbers. If you'd like to call in and ask Jordan a question, this may be your chance to talk to somebody who's involved in this heavily, especially if you've had children who've had questions about this, if you've gotten medical advice from people and you feel like you just want to ask a question about that, give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things I learned from you, Jordan, is this detransitioning care is not a small business out there. We almost might call it a transition care industrial complex, because there's a lot of companies making a lot and people making a lot of money off this.
Yeah, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, which is just staggering when you think about it, but both from the pharmaceutical side and then as well as the surgical side.
And what about the pharmaceutical side? They're providing hormone therapy and other things for kids who are and there's oftentimes been doctors who want to. You've got a child who's hitting puberty really quickly and very young, and they may say, "Well, we're going to use a puberty blocker just to slow this down a little bit." But that's not what we're talking about here.
Well, so there are so let me back up and just say it's pharmaceutical, and then it's the medical professionals, and then I think I just said surgery, but it's everything, right? So it's the therapists who see these kids. It's the primary care providers or the pediatricians who prescribe something like puberty blockers and or cross-sex hormones. Everybody in there is profiting, and here's the kind of the sickest part when Merrill is when you take one of these kids or young adults, these vulnerable individuals, and put them on cross-sex hormones, and this speaks to the monetary side of it, is you are effectively creating a lifelong patient no matter what. Because obviously if they stay trans-identifying, then they're going to continue to need that prescription in perpetuity. And then if they detransition, very often if you're on cross-sex hormones for not too long, but your body will lose its ability to produce your natural hormones. So a girl gets put on testosterone for a couple of years. She decides, oh my gosh, this was a horrible mistake, and she snaps out of it. Well, she's still got to go back and she's got to get estrogen for the rest of her life. And so you're creating a lifelong patient, which is a tremendous financial incentive, I would think, for a lot of these people in this industry.
And you've had people, one of the things we found out in the last year or two is there have been whistleblowers that have been part of the industry, working in the industry, and I guess would, at least at one point, supportive of the industry, who've said, what I'm seeing is wrong and I am pulling out of that. Tell us about some of those people.
Yeah, so Jamie Reed was sort of the first one to come into big national prominence. She worked
and this is not like a conservative evangelical.
Jamie is anything but. She is a good friend. She was working at a pediatric gender clinic at Washington University in St. Louis, and then basically became alarmed at what she was seeing as just kids getting fast-tracked into these life-altering decisions. And so she spoke out to the Free Press, and obviously she's got put on, I think, administrative leave. I may be getting that wrong, but it sent her career in a different trajectory to where now she has started what's called the LGBT Courage Coalition, with whom we talk and try to work with a lot. But she's, kind of dedicating her life towards pushing back against the thing that she was doing just a few years ago, because she recognizes what a problem this is and how many kids are getting chewed up and their bodies destroyed by this. Tamara Pitsky is another whistleblower. She's actually our client in Washington State, who similarly you wouldn't describe as a red conservative or anything like that. She's, if anything, she would actually have told you I was an affirming therapist, but what they were telling me to do with these kids who have so many comorbidities and mental health issues is I'm being told you just affirm and you make sure they get their hormones. And she said, that's crazy. I can't do that. So she spoke up. And of course, that launched not one, but two investigations by the state of Washington's into her license, which are still pending. We represent her in those as well. And then, of course, locally, you have Dr. Eitan Heim, who spoke out about the practices at Texas Children's, and that was enough to get the DOJ to come after him, and so he got indicted in a federal lawsuit there. So you're starting to see others come out of the woodwork, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have more and more as again, sort of going back to what we talked about last segment, that cultural shift. I think now it's more acceptable, and I hope we're going to see a lot more whistleblowers. You mentioned the mental health problems. One of the things that we've come to conclude about this is a lot of these kids who say they want to transition or think they may want to, they're being affected by social media and other things, and many of them have mental health struggles that some of these clinics are not working through. That's exactly right. And every one of these clinics aren't working through. What you're seeing when I say kids are getting fast-tracked is you have these. So we've spoken with 130, 140 now potential clients or families, and it is a shockingly sad and similar story over and over and over and over again, which is a vulnerable young kid, typically girl, about, if you look at the data statistically, it's about of quote-unquote trans-identifying youth, it's about 70-30 girls, boys. There's, I'm sure, explanations we could get into if you'd like, but we have noticed that as well, almost exactly the same 70-30 as far as individuals that have reached out to us who've been impacted by this. And so you've got a young girl who has, 4, 5, 6, 7 mental health comorbidities, so health issues, so anxiety, depression, a history of suicide, sexual abuse in the past. A lot of the times that's why a young woman, for instance, will be uncomfortable with, puberty and turning into a woman, because their idea of what a woman is being objectified and abused. And so it's naturally scary. And so you've got these, almost all of our clients are on the spectrum. Most everybody we've talked to is somewhere on the autism spectrum. Yes. And so you've got these kids who have all these issues that they need appropriate help for, therapy, processing. Oftentimes they just need time to go through puberty, because it turns out that's hard for everybody to go through, right? You and I both know that.
It is indeed.
And so instead of getting that help, they are, at the first, sometimes second, appointment, they're getting prescribed cross-sex hormones. Boom, just like that. You have clinics that will advertise and brag that you can get it within a 15 to 30-minute meeting, including Planned Parenthood, which is, most people don't realize, the single largest provider of cross-sex hormones for trans-identifying youths. So you have these really, really broken individuals, and they're getting pushed into these life-altering decisions. And I'll tell you, the sickest thing that we see, and we see it over and over and over again in terms of being pushed into this, because this is not their, oftentimes these kids and or especially their parents don't know, that the parents have no idea what to do with this.
Right.
And so what do? Okay, I guess we go see an expert. So you go to see the expert, and the expert tells the parents almost every time it's what we call the suicide fallacy, or the suicide myth, rather, where they literally tell the parents, would you rather have a living son or a dead daughter? And it's emotional blackmail of the highest order. It's abhorrent, but it is employed over and over and over again. We've seen it time and again, and it's sad and it's sick.
So the parents give the consent, and then it begins to move forward. And then what happens?
So then usually, just our typical client profile is they'll go forward. They will usually proceed from.
These are minors.
These are typically minors. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times, this is most people think it's just kids. It's just preteens or teenagers. When we see young adults, 19, 20, 25-year-olds who get caught up in this madness. So it's not just minors, but it's the common thread is they're all very mentally and emotionally compromised. And so they'll get started sometimes on puberty blockers if they get caught early enough. Almost 100% of kids who are put on puberty blockers for quote-unquote gender dysphoria are then put on cross-sex hormones subsequently. And they'll be on those for a number of years. And then some go on to get surgeries, which are obviously the most tragic and irreversible and damaging. But the damaging effects of cross-sex hormones, even for months, can have lifelong devastating effects. And so for our clients, at some point, they snap out of it. Something makes them realize, and then when they decide, oh my gosh, I'm not trans, it's too late for them.
1-800-351-1212 if you have a question for Jordan Campbell, as we're talking about detransitioners and how they get out of this and file lawsuits. So stay with us on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up, but we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back on Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and joining me in studio, Jordan Campbell. He is the founding partner of Campbell Miller Payne, and that is the only law firm, the first and only law firm dealing exclusively with detransitioners as they try to address the problems that they've had, mostly minors. But Jordan, tell me, if somebody were to call, walk us through the process. If I'm a parent and I'm concerned, how do I go through this process of contacting you?
Sure. So as far as our clients, typically we either get a just somebody writing into the website. Sometimes folks will just call and you answer and, oh my gosh, I might be talking to a new client. Yeah, exactly. Typically, though, it starts out via email or being introduced via email. Sometimes we get people sending folks to us. What we typically do is just schedule a call. Usually, we try to do a video call just because you're hearing somebody's most vulnerable parts of their life, and I'd like to at least get some level of familiarity and comfort there. In as much as it's you can be comfortable with talking to four grown men if you're a young woman who's gone through this, but we try. And so we have an intake call. Sometimes there will be maybe a second or third even. And then we'll ask for and get whatever doctor's notes we can, and then it's just it takes a good minute to prepare these things and evaluate the case, because you're talking about medical records going back for years and years across provider, 5, 6, 7, 8 providers sometimes. And so it takes us some time to evaluate. I was just in the break looking at a case we're looking at right now where we just got the records. And then if we think that there is a case that isn't time barred, so statute of limitations is a thing. And
that changes in states? Because do you work in all states?
So yes, our firm can, we have 13 live matters across 10 states, I want to say, 11. But yeah, the idea was that we can operate anywhere in the country, and that was just a strong conviction early on that if this was going to be successful, it needed to be, it's a national problem. So we need to be national in scope, our practice. So we partner with what's called local counsel. We find, local attorneys who basically sponsor us to be admitted for that one-off case. I see. And so we get admitted what's called pro hoc vice on a case-by-case basis in each jurisdiction we find ourselves.
So you talk to them. Are there cases that you feel like this is just not clear enough? The person isn't that committed to going forward. Cases that you just don't take.
Yes, and sadly, like I think I mentioned earlier, we've spoken to over 130, maybe 140 now potential clients, and we have to turn away a lot. Obviously, if we've only brought 13, and we're looking at I think 3 or 4 more currently in the hopper. But the biggest problem, the biggest reason we have to turn folks away, and I hate doing it every time, is like I just mentioned, the statute of limitations. Because and the statute of limitations, for those listening, is just it's law that says you only have X number of years to bring a medical malpractice case. Yeah. And so the legislatures have set that, sometimes common law, but the idea is, if statute of limitations is 3 years and our client's, treatment goes back 8 years ago, there's a legal question of whether you can bring a claim for care that happened so long ago. And so most frequently, if we're turning a case down, it's because it's time barred. The conduct happened too far in the past, or the client realized what happened, 3 years ago and 2 years. Sorry, tough luck. So that's the biggest reason we have to turn cases down. There are cases where folks have reached out to us and then gotten cold feet and said, actually, I don't think litigation is right for me. And that's absolutely the right decision for a lot of people, because litigation is not easy. It's hard. We try to tell folks up front, this is not, litigation is tough. It's going to take time. It can be emotionally wearing. It's the other side gets discovery into, your deepest, darkest secrets in some cases. Or just your most vulnerable, facts and stories. And then there are some where we determine that this person would not benefit from litigation. We don't think they have the mental health or just it would be too re-traumatizing, for instance. Can
civil cases be filed? Are these civil cases that we're talking about that you're doing?
Yes, these are all civil cases that we file.
Okay, so statute of limitations still apply even on the civil cases.
That's right.
And does that vary by state?
It does. It varies state to state, and even in terms of the number of years, one, and also in terms of what are the exceptions to it. Some states have, most states have what's called the discovery rule, which is just a basically law that says the statute of limitations is, let's say, 3 years, but it doesn't start to run until you realize or should have known about the harm that was done to you. So a surgeon leaves a sponge in a patient and doesn't manifest for 4 years. Well, the law says we're not going to hold you responsible for that 4-year gap. You didn't know about it. And then some states have what's called not just statute of limitations, which says you have X number of years, but there may be exceptions. Some states have what's called the statute of repose that says no matter what, this is the number of years. There are no exceptions, hard line, and those are the toughest states.
So you've decided to accept the case. What happens next?
Well, we start preparing the lawsuit. So we continue to review records. We try to get any other medical records that we haven't seen in the case evaluation phase. And then we work up the case. And so you're pouring through medical records, you're looking for, the egregious conduct, and then ultimately we'll draft what's called the complaint or petition if you're here in Texas. And that's what most people would refer to as, they filed the lawsuit. You're filing the complaint, which initiates the lawsuit. And then you're off and running.
And you have some that are, where are some of these in process now? Are you getting close, or do you go to trial, or do they settle outside of trial, or where are we?
That's a great question. We'll let you know where we are as we continue to go. So, our firm is less than 2 years old, and our first case is not surprisingly the furthest along, but it's still not set for trial, I don't think, till next year. We have 3 matters.
2026.
Yes, we have 3 matters that are currently set for October, and then as far as what are they going to settle? Are they going to get jury trial? That's a great question. We still don't know the answer. Typically, just speaking of civil lawsuits, the vast majority will settle before trial. And as we like to say, deadlines make deals, right? And so oftentimes you have the parties litigate, and then eve of trial, boom, settlement. That may happen, may not. This is such a charged issue and sort of mission critical to the other side that they may say, we're not going to settle. We got to take this all the way to see it all the way through. We're going to fight this thing to the doggone end. And frankly, I hope we do get some trials, because I would love to tell our clients' stories to a jury and let them put a number on that.
So primarily you're looking for financial. Does it sometimes, are you asking for apologies, a change of practice, things of that nature?
Well, we can't get that from a lawsuit or excuse me, from say something went through a jury trial. The ultimately what we can provide as civil litigators is monetary recovery. So that could be a financial settlement, that could be a jury verdict. Now, if you're talking settlement discussions, we can certainly ask for some of those different things. And that's just a straight up negotiation. And if our clients want it, we will. But it'd be tough to get one of these folks to agree not to do this, to change their practice. Hopefully, if we start winning enough and you start seeing some big awards, they're going to come to that conclusion on their own that should probably stop doing this to these kids.
Yeah, my thought all along has been that the best solution, probably the most effective solution, is if some of these medical centers and doctors and so forth start having to pay out major malpractice awards, then the malpractice insurers are going to say, we're not going to cover you anymore, and that ultimately sort of resolves the problem.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The insurance angle is huge, and that was one of our goals is even just filing lawsuits is enough to start raising the insurance carriers' antennas. And there were a couple stories last year where it was basically saying that in light of these lawsuits being filed, insurance carriers were, in this one-off anecdote, had raised the cost of getting insurance coverage so much so that this doctor who wanted to start a gender clinic had to raise money, but it's the insurance is responding to what they perceive as massive risk, and the more wins, the more risk there is, and they'll either make it cost prohibitive to enter that, to get coverage, or they're just going to drop it altogether. And that's the big win.
1-800-351-1212. We'll be back in our final segment with Jordan Campbell talking about the transgender, detransitioning from gender care and the problems that's created and the lawsuits that are being filed on that. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View, our final segment with Jordan Campbell, as we talk about his efforts to represent clients who transitioned as minors and now are looking at detransitioning, and just the kind of sense that they felt like they were being railroaded through some of these decisions they made as minors, and now many of them are adults. And Jordan, I think you told me that this really can't be a class action suit, even though there's lots of people with similar stories.
That's right. We get asked a lot, is this going to turn into a class action? And the short answer is no. And there's various legal reasons for it, but I think the simplest way is with class actions, you typically see a uniformity in damages. So, like for instance, I once got a check as a class member for LA Fitnesses. They had been sued for making it impossible to cancel your membership.
I remember seeing those things.
There, everybody has had the same harm, right? You can get your. Whereas with our clients, their damages are completely different. Some of them went through this. Some of them went through just quote unquote hormones. Some went through one surgery. Some had 2 or 3 different surgeries. So it just it makes it too difficult. You're not going to be able to get a class certification. So they're just individual lawsuits.
So we talked a bit about the children who made these decisions, oftentimes through advice from medical providers, doctors, and so forth, therapists who were encouraging this to move forward. Now they are wanting to detransition, but you can't just walk away from this. What kind of lives are they looking at now?
Yes, it's very difficult is the short answer. Physically, obviously, their bodies are beyond repair. You can't recover.
And that's true if they've just taken hormones, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, just quote unquote hormones will has devastating effects on a young woman or young man's body, irreversible effects. For a girl, for instance, taking testosterone, there, as one of our clients will say, her bone structure is that of a man, broad shoulders, narrow waist. Sometimes, the hips don't develop like they would through female puberty, and so they will no longer be able to birth a child. Should they be able to conceive? And that's a big question.
Even the ability to conceive could be a problem.
Exactly. If you're put on puberty blockers followed by cross-sex hormones, it is almost certain that you will never be able to conceive. And so you've got, to your point a moment ago, of just kids making these monumental decisions, or rather being sort of having those foisted upon them. And we hear this all the time from our clients, that, 19, 20, 21, they're thinking, my gosh, I really wish I could have a kid. I want to be a mom. I didn't know I couldn't appreciate that at all as a 9-year-old. Mm-hmm. I was a kid who got caught up in something and fixated on it. And the idea of forfeiting motherhood didn't mean the first thing to be, but my gosh, it's everything now.
There was a time when even mentioning that some people might want to detransition was sort of anathema. People said, "Oh, you can't talk about that."
That's right. Just to kind of bring our conversation kind of full circle is the difference, right? Like you just mentioned, there was a time not that long ago where you couldn't even suggest that was possible. Mm-hmm. And again, just to speak to the cultural shift, the growing momentum we have on our side of this issue, just generally speaking, I think that the climate's completely different. It's becoming okay to step forward. It's becoming okay to say I was wronged, to realize, oh my gosh, this was all a lie, and to, wear the term detransitioner.
We had talked about big pharma in this and the pharmaceutical role in this, and I think you've told me that you aren't filing suit against the pharmaceutical companies, at least at this point. You think that may change at some point? And what I'm thinking of is with like the OxyContin and Purdue Pharma. Mm-hmm. Purdue Pharma's paying out. I think they filed for bankruptcy. The family is paying out billions of dollars on this, and part of it was because they looked at this and they said, you weren't just providing this drug based upon a doctor's recommendation, you were actually sort of pushing this and promoting this. And so if it comes out that some of the drug companies were promoting these things, does that open them up?
Yes, you're exactly right. To get liability against the pharmaceutical companies for the off-label use of a prescription drug. Mm-hmm. You do need to be able to show that they were actively promoting the off-label use. Off-label just refers to has not been approved by the FDA right. for that purpose.
And just for our listeners, doctors use drugs off-label, oftentimes, especially cancer drugs. Maybe approved for an adult, they're using on a minor or teenager. I mean, they use off-label is not unusual.
Exactly.
So you'd have to be able to prove that they were somehow or the other actively promoting this in some way.
Correct. It's and again, just to reference something we talked about earlier, but it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, the cross-sex hormone and puberty blocking industry for quote-unquote gender-affirming care. So I suspect, just personally, I don't have anything that I can point to, but I suspect they know what they're doing and they've been promoting it because it is just so lucrative.
So you mentioned that several states have passed laws, various ways of prohibiting this. Do the states sometimes contact you to get information from you about what they should use in these laws?
Yeah, so we have worked with AG's offices, state legislators across the country. In fact, I've got to go. I'm late to get something to a certain state representative's office this afternoon, touching on these issues. But we do get asked about it. We get asked both in terms of insight, what would be helpful for our clients, lifting the statute of limitations, lifting or getting the non-economic damages cap, so the pain and anguish, suffering damages caps. A lot of states will have hard caps on that, getting those lifted for this type of quote care. So stuff like that is where they've reached out to us to see what would be helpful, and then also once a legislation is passed, there's hearings on it, and they have asked, and our clients have testified across the country in support of certain state bills, saying this is what's happening. Let me be a cautionary tale with this. This legislation is necessary because there's other kids just like me who are getting chewed up and spit out.
The notion just crossed my mind, but could a state pass legislation saying you cannot sell malpractice insurance in our state for this particular kind of care?
I would bet so. Once you start getting into regulating insurance, I'm going to go ahead and admit I'm a little bit out of my expertise there, but I don't see why not, although I'm getting a little bit over my skis there.
So if somebody wants to talk to you, find out more about what you're doing, and maybe bring their own concerns to you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, easiest way is go to our website, dtranslaw.com. There's a
dtranslaw, all one word.
dtranslaw.com, all one word. Just go to the website. There's a contact us. You can fill out a submission form right there on the webpage, and it'll go to all the attorneys, and we try to get back in touch with you as soon as we can.
So if you get back in touch with them, then they're prepared to. You have the conference call to sort of start working through this situation.
That's right. It begins that process of kind of what we walked through in one of our previous segments.
Because you're just starting this now, or you've been doing this for a couple of years, but you haven't really gone to trial. You don't have a lot of rewards that you can point to yet, but I guess you're hopeful in some cases.
Oh, we're very, very, very optimistic. I mean, all of our cases are horrific and tragic, and I think the liability is very clear, and I think it's very substantial. So we haven't gotten there yet. The other side makes you earn it, as it would turn out, but we're optimistic. We're going to see our first recovery starting towards the end of this year.
Well, Jordan Campbell, thank you so much for joining me. I think you're doing the Lord's work in this. It's a job that's got to be a tough job, but it needs to be done.
It's very difficult. I'm not going to lie, but it's also the most rewarding and fulfilled I've ever had in my working life.
If you want to find out more about that, you can go to pointofview.net, and we'll have a link to his website there so you can find out more. Thank you for joining us today on Point of View.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
Thank you, Kirby. I really appreciate your program. You cover a lot of issues that a lot of us think about, I'm sure. And this